John Barnwell here in the Motor City with my best buddy, the master teacher, Dr. Douglas J. Gabriel, the author of the foreword to my first book, The Arcana of the Grail Angel. And we're going to address some subjects today that I think is increasingly relevant in the times in which we live. And this is the sixth version of what is cosmic intelligence. And so in light of that and the symphony of the seven unutterable secrets or seven great mysteries, the sixth mystery is the mystery of the Logos. And in the beginning was the Word, and so on. It's almost too sacred to mention, but yet here we are. And so without further ado, I bring my good friend, the Dr. Douglas J. Gabriel. Hi there, Douglas.
You call me doctor one more time, I'm going to have to operate.
Well, there's so many doctors running around giving their opinions. I thought you might as well chime in, but we'll give the super sensible version.
I love it when our PR staff calls me the master teacher. Well, I have a master's degree and I've been a teacher for a long, long time. But what I'm really thrilled about today is we're finally, after our last podcast, we had a question from a subscriber who asked us why we don't address basically the entire biography of the human I am, the ego, you know, how it comes about, if there are stages, what they relate to, what we should look for and all of that. And basically, I was so thrown aback by that frank question that I immediately dove into studying everything on that I could. And it took me so far afield that it's taken that long for me to come back just to be able to have a conversation with you about it, John. So I'm excited because it's led to two articles, one recently on how Buddhism and anthroposophy relate to each other. And a second one is now being worked on about the I am over basically humanity's entire historical development. And that is one incredibly large topic. And as you know, as a Waldorf teacher, I taught Waldorf teacher trainers for many, many years, and no one wanted to teach the course, the dreaded course called The Study of Man, which is Steiner's book, which is basically a psychology of the human being. That is such a difficult book, and it is so difficult. I don't recommend it to anybody. First off, the title, you know, The Study of the Human Being, perhaps, but it's really the experience of knowledge, because what he's done there is he's laid down a new psychology that is completely backed up by a new physiology, a new medicine, a new pedagogy. And The Study of Man is where you will find that in the book Theosophy by Steiner, the clearest exposés on what is the human I am, the human ego, and also then in one lecture course he gave in Italy, in Bologna, and in there he talks about the three egos, one of the few places he does. So today I want to talk about those things, but they are such delicate issues that I'll try to take it easy on people, because it's enough to make your brain just fold in upon itself.
Yeah, we received that question from our dear friend in Russia, the anthroposophical Dr. Yuri. And to try and plumb the depths of Rudolf Steiner regarding the ego and the three egos and the macrocosmic ego and the microcosmic ego and a whole series of conceptual approaches, I'll call them, because they're not definitions. And that's the struggle that I continually have in trying to present the work of Rudolf Steiner and do it justice, is not to try and encase it and codify it in some kind of encrusted version, you know, but rather to try and perhaps use watercolors and just, you know, give gentle brush strokes to try and create an imagination that is health giving to people rather than try to crush them down into granulation of concepts. And so I think that's why I enjoy so much talking with Douglas, because for whatever reason, karmic affinity, or maybe we even slayed each other on the battlefield and
Hip hip.
a few 100 or 1,000 years ago, that we definitely have some karma together. And so that's a beautiful thing. And any of you that are out there that are trying to develop these concepts, it's so much easier if you have somebody to study with or a group. And I can't recommend it highly enough, even though like the youth circle that was founded and drew criticism from the elder anthroposophists. And Rudolf Steiner made the point, and he was very direct to them. And he said, hey, look, the enthusiasm that they bring and the sincerity of their approach to the task, that is the important thing, you know. And I'm not quoting him, I'm just paraphrasing him. But so we have to understand that we shouldn't be shy and afraid to try and approach envisioning or intoning or acting out of impulses from the spiritual world. That's why we're here. Meaning not Douglas and I, although we're included in that, but that the circle in which mankind is working through is an effort to be able to bring to Earth this cosmic intelligence into embodiment in the human form. And Christ already, through his crucifixion and resurrection, has created the ultimate archetype, never to be repeated, for human endeavor, activity, development as we move toward the future. And so there's no more important topic than to come to a clear understanding of the ego. And so that's why it took us 2 months to get back here, because it's such a gigantic topic. And but that being said, let's see if we can approach this a little bit further. For me, by the way, I woke up this morning with an imagination that I'll share with you in a little bit that I think will summarize some of the things that'll come up here. You have to pay attention when you wake up in the morning, because the spiritual world can give you gifts, and you can ask questions at night before you go to bed and see what comes up. And so I can share with you something that I received that was a kind of a surprising image. Douglas?
Well, I think some of you know that, of course, we have the neoanthroposophy.com site and the ourspirit.com site. And so what I did is, in the program notes, I put together 6 pages for you to read for as reference to what I'm going to say today. Because what I'm going to say today will sound, in a way, so far out that unless I give my justification of Rudolf Steiner's own words, you may find that it sounds as if I'm just making this stuff up, but I'm not. And so it is called, this is extracted from Attain Imagination, Inspiration, and Intuition by Discovering Your 3 Egos, written by myself in 2017, and it's on ourspirit.com. You can go there and search any topic you want, and some article will probably come up. And also, while I was studying this, John and I came across this particular site. What is it? Free Man Thinking or something? Free Man. Anyway, it's a great site. And then I came across a couple other sites. There are some people really trying to do exactly what John just said. You need someone to kind of step down this knowledge into something that is applicable to you personally in your life, so that it means something to you. So that's what I try to do in this article. And I talk about the 3 stages of initiation. Remember, that's what we talked about in the last talk, the last podcast, and the one before that. We were saying that if you can tap into your higher self, that you have 3 stages you can go through: imagination, inspiration, and intuition. And last time I was characterizing how absolutely difficult it is to do this. This is not a piece of cake. This is the most terrifying thing that you will ever experience, because you're fighting yourself. So your own doubt, your own fear, your own hatred, or actually doubt, hatred, and fear. If you haven't wrestled with those, when you try to go into the spiritual world to contact your higher self and to work with your higher self and offer up all the goodness that your soul has been able to create, which in esotericism is called the Virgin Sophia. So in your soul, and we'll talk about the three parts of the soul in a second, but when your soul can actually offer up that Virgin Sophia to your higher self, that's when the really great stuff starts to happen. But that really is going to happen to us as we become angels, archangels, and archai. When imagination, inspiration, intuition, and by the way, I feel very bad, and I want to state this. Should have always said, when I'm speaking of imagination, inspiration, intuition, I'm referring to what Rudolf Steiner has described in Philosophy of Freedom called moral imagination, moral inspiration, moral technique, or moral intuition. And so, all of those arise from love. They all arise from intuition. So even imagination is tinged with intuition. So there are parts of you right now that have aspects of your future self that you can manifest at this moment. There's technical names for this, but basically you could call it the synchronicity of chronology. If there is no such thing as time, and there isn't to an angel, an archangel, or an archai, then when you become those parts of yourself, there is no time. And so really the future is now. And that sounds crazy, but that happens for initiates. An initiate can go into these realms, and we'll talk about the fact that the Buddhists call this Nirmanakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Dharmakaya, and that as you manifest those aspects, you're manifesting aspects of your own bodhisattva nature, turning into a Buddha, according to the Buddhist stream. In anthroposophy, you would be developing imagination, inspiration, intuition, which would be called spirit self, life spirit, spirit man, or spirit human. In Vedic wisdom, they call it manas, buddhi, and atman. There are many, many names to these three realms. And so when we're talking about initiation, we're not talking about initiation in this physical plane. We're talking about initiation in higher planes. And you might say, now that is completely crazy. But this is how simple it is. If you were in any of my Study of Man classes, by the way, when I first read Study of Man, I threw the book across the room because I said Steiner's insane. I had read, many, 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 many of his books. There's like hundreds of them, and I'd probably read most of them. And then I finally came across Study of Man because I didn't like the title. So I waited to read it. So then I threw it across the room, and for like 6 months, it was behind a radiator. And I pulled it out again and read it, had the same experience. I said, this is insane. He's the most perfectly sane person in everything I've ever read until this book. And now I can't even hold it in my hand. I can't deal with it. It took me probably teaching that course at least 10 times before I actually began to scrape the surface off of what Steiner's new psychology is. So in this article, there's a psychological explanation of what happens to you when you rise into the realm of imagination, inspiration, intuition. And we talked about that last time. And then in a while, I'm going to read to you about the group soul. Everybody wants to know, but nobody wants to explain. What is the group soul of the animal? What are the group souls of the plants and of the minerals? And how do those play into what a human being is? And that's the key factor. One quick thing, you're a sevenfold being and a ninefold being. We'll talk about the ninefold in a while when we talk about the soul. But let's just say that you have a physical body, an etheric body, which could call it life body, but you can't see it. It's invisible. So already we're into the realm of supersensible perception, just describing what we see as the very vehicle, the body that we're in. So we have a physical body, everyone will admit. We have a life body. Well, yeah, something keeps it alive. When you go to sleep at night, it regenerates itself and does all this magic stuff no one can figure out. Okay? And then you have an astral body, because everybody's desires are different, and that's what makes them different. And their astral body is like their head. And their head is the whole zodiac, the animal circle around us, but it's a sphere. And all the animals rushing forward into your face depend upon whether or not you've controlled those animal desires. And if you haven't, you will look like an animal. But if you have, you can look like an angel. And so that's the astral. So the astral body is, again, super sensible. No one can hardly explain it. Psychics, that's the body that most very superficial psychics are reading, is the astral body, your body of desires. Okay, and then we get to the ego. Holy moly. I gave this challenge to the students in the study of man. Rudolf Steiner refers to the human ego throughout the study of man. I said, I'll give $500 to the person who can show me where Rudolf Steiner says the ego of man is. No one ever claimed that $500. Though he talks about the ego more than you can imagine and describes it better than anyone, he still doesn't tell you where it is, because that's a super secret, which we'll, I think, get to today. So the ego's in the middle. So the ego controls your astral body through the angels, your etheric body through the archangels, and your physical body through the time beings of the archai. So simultaneously, those beings of the hierarchy are there in your body. And when you redeem them, they become three higher spiritual natures. So your astral body becomes what is called by Rudolf Steiner spirit self. Your etheric body, when transformed with the help of archangels, will become life spirit, and your physical body will become Atman, or the spiritual self. What would be called the, instead of the spirit man, I don't like using that term, the spirit human being. That doesn't sound right either. But anyway, so these three lower ones are controlled by the ego that we know on the earth, and that's a very temporary ego. And they then control the development of the other three above us. Can we rise up to these things? No. Most people can't cross the threshold consciously. They don't have conscious dreams. They can't meditate and go across the threshold. They don't know where their ego is. And when we start to describe what Rudolf Steiner says is the nature of the ego and where it comes from, it is going to sound so crazy that many people would just turn it off and say, well, that's just silly spiritual materialism or silly nonsense, when in fact it is the science of the spirit. This is a science, to the point that the very hierarchical beings we're talking about have periods of time that they have rulership over. They are the shepherds of certain periods of time. You can study those time periods and find the qualitative nature of those archangels and their periods. This isn't some kind of airy-fairy New Age nonsense. This goes down into a science which in the future will be known by everyone, because they will simply see that that's the way that it works. And that's the beauty of what we're talking about here. The I am that I am, the burning bush, the quiet whispered voice, the unmanifest God, the completely manifest great God, the Magner Mater, all these different beings. Who are these beings? Well, it's very, very simple. They are you, and you are an exact replica of the entire cosmos, what Steiner calls a zodiac. And you will attain that realm in the future, so that you will be doing that job for other beings who will come up through the ranks of being human, like we're coming up through the ranks of being human, trying to figure out how to bring freedom into love through wisdom. And that's the whole mission. So when we're talking about the higher egos, to just start this conversation, that was just a preliminary. To start the conversation, I'll just say the following. Your ego can't really be found in your physical body. You've never really met your ego. And if you think you have, and it had anything to do with sense-bound perception, you are incorrect. That's not your ego. The ego is still in the spiritual world. And it only comes to dwell as a witness here when we have health and the ability to stand upright and speak and think, these gifts that have been given to us by hierarchical beings, particularly the Christ, who gave those pre-earthly deeds to us, the ability to stand upright, to speak, and to think. Those are the gifts of the solar. John started this off talking about the logos, the solar logos. That is what you have to understand if you wish to know what the mystery of Golgotha which is the mystery of the I am, the mystery of the human ego is all about, you're going to definitely have to understand what the solar logos is about. And when you do, you will find the home of your own ego, because that's where your ego exists too. And the Mother Lodge, the Sun Mother Lodge, our egos really don't come down to the earth completely, even when we're incarnated. So those are thoughts that Rudolf Steiner gives us very seldomly, and it gives very few explanations of them. But if you wish to grapple with them, it can take you many years to understand what the nature of the human ego is.
Yes, the study of man. That's the you. I couldn't say anything more than what you said. It will confound even the most stalwart anthroposophist, because it requires you to participate. Unless you actually enter into the concepts that are expressed within that lecture cycle. It's not really a book, it's a lecture cycle. Unless you could really embody what's within those pages, you can't get there, and which is often the case with Steiner. I mean, you get somebody who's used to typical abstract thinking, Euclidean, there's only 17 fundamental forms, structuralist basis of thinking. Then you read Steiner, you get to the end of the paragraph and you go, what just happened? And that's because there's a requirement within Rudolf Steiner's work that you actually engage yourself with the content that's in there, and that's the challenge. And actually, it's interesting because in the 12th lecture of the Gospel of John lecture cycle that Rudolf Steiner gave, he makes the point when talking about the first stage of development of imagination. And he gets into description and painting a picture, so to speak, of the ancient world and the way in which in the mysteries they would deal with this initiation, coming to an experience of these things, and that required they would be brought into a trance for 3 days. And that's very different from today. So people that try and take ancient world mysteries and then just kind of take it to today and try to make it like it's the same thing are missing the point entirely, because it just as a flower unfolds through stages as a plant. It comes up from a little shoot, and the stem and the leaves and the flower and the seed, that everything has a process. And that's that apocalyptic thinking that is within Rudolf Steiner's work, where he talks about the 7 incarnations of the earth, which is really a tough subject for somebody with conventional thinking to grapple with. But if you don't grapple with that, then you're not going to understand any of the conversations we have, because that's the fundament, is that the earth is the 4th stage, it's the 4th incarnation of the world in which we're living. And so you have Saturn, Sun, Moon, and so that's the primal physical, the primal etheric, and the primal astral. And now on Earth, it's the introduction of the ego. And then after that, depending on the extent to which the ego can bring itself into a proper relationship with all of these vehicles, will determine what happens in the next 3 stages, where you go to the spirit self, the life spirit, and the spirit human, or spirit man, or Atma. So it's, Manas, Buddhi, and Atman in the Oriental scheme. But if you're studying esotericism and you study a writer, and if they don't know what I just said there in the last 30 seconds to 1 minute, they really don't know anything about initiation. And there's a lot of people out there, by the way, that are running around talking like they understand. But if you don't know those seed concepts, that you could take with you the 7 great mysteries or the 7 unutterable secrets of Blavatsky or Tasso Schemata that's used by C.G. Harrison, you're not going to have anything to hold the content of the spiritual world in the right way. And Rudolf Steiner said that when I talk about these things like old Saturn, old Sun, it's confusing to people. He said, but that's the Christ language. And that's the language that you need in order to be able to be filled with the content that you can receive through the mystery of Golgotha. And that's referring specifically to the esoteric school that was founded by Paul in Athens. And the first leader of the school was Dionysius the Areopagite. And there was also another school founded in Egypt by Mark. He was sent there by St. Peter, and in that school, it's a different approach because he encountered Ormus, who was a priest at the Serapis, and he initiated this priest into Christianity, and out of that, you get kind of the lodge. The Freemasonic stream is related to that. The true Freemasonic stream and Templars and all of that, so that you have these 2 fundamental primal headwaters, so to speak, of this particular school of thought. And unless one comes to terms with the understanding of supersensible beings and to understand the supersensible destiny of man, you're in a difficult place when you're trying to understand the nature of the ancient mysteries, because they don't lend themselves to definitions. And that's why Rudolf Steiner, he doesn't go there. He doesn't define things because things change. We're going through continual metamorphosis, so that you couldn't go do the initiation of the ancient mysteries and get the same result. You couldn't do it because that's not what time it is right now. We have a different path in which to proceed. You could get something, but it wouldn't be the same as what they got back then, or you got when you were doing it back then. It's, you talk about them all the time, and it's us. The ancient world is us. And in coming to understand that, it's helpful to remember where Rudolf Steiner talks about that the etheric, that its potential is to become the life spirit, is that which streams toward us out of the past, and that's memory. And then out of the future is the astral, and that's streaming all of our wishes, our dreams, and longings, and all of those tendencies. And the ego dwells in the gap between these 2 particular realms. And if I could, I'll give you a little image that I awoke with this morning that approached me in a way that I'd never approached it before. It was something new, which for an old salt like me is kind of a interesting thing, and I've never seen it in any books, because you'll find in the Eastern school reference to the whole idea of the Om, and the lotus growing is a symbol of the lotus growing out of the swamp, right? And the swamp is all murky and all of that. And that you have this pristine lotus flower, and that's the symbol of being able to rise out of materiality and the murky astrality, to be able to go through a catharsis, as it's described, which is purification, to be able to bring into being these higher vehicles, because you're not really adding anything. You're taking what's there and it becomes reconfigured, so that you reconfigure your astral by purifying it of all the strife, as it's called, like in the Grail legends, the conflict. And that's the Parsifal fighting the Red Knight, right? And then he gets to put on the armor of the Red Knight. So he gets to come to the experience of being inside of it rather than approaching it from outside. And see, it's these reversals, these mirror imagings, that make it difficult to get through a lecture cycle like the Study of Man, for example, because the directions have meaning. And when you get into this idea of the lotus, don't forget, the lotus is growing up out of the water. But what do you have in the water? it reflects the image of the lotus, right? And so you're seeing a reflection of the image of your ego, right? That's quite tenuous. And it's this whole idea of mirroring and then future, past, and what Douglas talked about, the timeless present, what the Rosicrucians call the world of duration. But see, if you can get to the concept that Patanjali works with in the Yoga Sutras, where he says meditation is the cessation of the modifications of the mind. That if you can get to a state to where you're just like quiescent and allowing that which in you is mind, is manas, to clarify, it will reflect the higher worlds. That's what we're talking about here fundamentally. And that first stage within esoteric Christianity is called the Virgin Sophia. Douglas?
Yes, that's so true. And what you pointed out is really nails it. And it's what I've been working on. It's what is enlightenment? Okay, you have the Lamrim path, you have the path of Steiner called knowledge of higher worlds, you have the Lojong path, you have the Dzogchen path. You have all these paths. And what's that for? It's to tell you what to do with your ego. It's to tell you what to do with your consciousness, with your I am. And it's supposedly to make it become the best that it can be so that it can actually transcend this realm. But then, depending upon, as I said before, what is the point for you of what your ego is? Where did it come from? Where is it now? Where is it going? Without this cosmology, without what John talked about, which we call the language of the spirit, or basically a framework, to use it, lack of a better word, a jargon, a language, a dialect, which to speak this, it's almost impossible to get to the subtle elements. And that's what I've been focused on lately, is that the mental training path of the East and its incredible variety, which is almost impossible for a Westerner to understand, is all the same thing. And it's very simple. And once you get a cosmology, and that's the reason that my wife and I put together the Gospel of Sophia series, Dr. Tyler Gabriel, the Gospel of Sophia. The third book is a modern initiation of Sophia Christos, exactly what Steiner said we needed in our age. See, if Christ is our higher ego, how does that work? When our ego becomes Christened, is it the same as Christ? What is the point? Is there something beyond Christ? Where did Christ come from? How is it that the ego developed? How do we see the mile markers, the waystones that tell us that we're on the right path? Well, right now I want to read from the same Gospel of John series that you just made reference to, a passage. It's a bit long, but it's not that long. But what Rudolf Steiner could say in a paragraph is usually beyond imagination. I want to use this as a foundation for the next things I'm going to talk about, which is, where do we find the ego and what is its future? And also a bit of what is its past. So, ... men walk the earth with their ego, but the egos of the animals are on the astral plane. Each group of animals there possesses an ego consciousness in common. There is, however, in the astral world not only the ego of the animal, but also the ego of the body, which man has in common with the animals, the ego of the human astral body. In the lower spirit world, we find the ego of the plants, and also the ego of the body man possesses in common with the plants, the ego of the etheric body. It's getting thick, folks. If we rise still higher into the higher spirit world, we there find the ego of the minerals and the ego of that part which man has in common with the minerals, the ego of the physical body. Now, that's got so many concepts in it, I have to break it down. I'm only halfway through the paragraph. But we're talking about hierarchical beings who are the group ego for the animal, which is even above the group ego of the human beings, which is found at the realm of the Elohim, which is where the solar logos, the Christ, who is from the Trinity, but when Christ came to the earth, Christ worked through the seven Elohim to come into this earth plane all the way into the physical nature, once and only once. So what this is saying here is what John was just describing as ancient Saturn, ancient sun, ancient moon, and earth. So when we're talking about the animal group ego, it was actually created in the previous incarnation of the earth called the ancient moon. But in our own astral body, we have concurrently working with us those same beings who came to their human form on ancient moon, who are acting as the group ego of the animals, which are in fact higher beings than us. If we go into the realm of plants, it's even higher beings. So if the Elohim are for the human, then the dunamis, or the beings of motion, are for the animals. The beings above them, the Kuriotetes, are for the plants. And that's the reason that the beings of wisdom, the Kuriotetes, work through light and work through plants, and that there were beings in an ancient time who, the archangels in this case, who worked through that being human at the moment, the only humanness, the furthest that they ever became physical, they became human. So they actually used the ancient substances of the light in ancient sun period with the Kuriotetes and the archangels that we now use for our etheric body. So imagine how wise our etheric body is. That's the reason when we transform our astral body, the body of animals, the animal desire, the body of the etheric that we have, then we're understanding all of the plants and their group soul higher nature and realms of the hierarchy far above us. And then with the minerals, that's the highest, and that's the thrones. And so when the thrones first manifest through the archai, they were warmth. Now they're crystals, literally mineral and metal crystals that had to go through a fiery process through again and again, going through what like a butterfly goes through with being a chrysalis and being born again and again until now in this stage, our ego has the ability to walk on solid ground because of the ego sacrifice of the archai beings. Now, I know that sounds extraordinarily complicated, but it's necessary before you can even take the first step into understanding your higher ego. Because all else is down here in the physical world, and you're not going to be able to relate almost anything that you know in the physical world to the spiritual. So going on, as we pointed out, to know these things is to be initiated. Initiation is this process. And that's the reason in the third book of the Gospel of Sophia, we gave you the pillars of the temple of wisdom to develop morality. Just like in the Indian teaching, you would have to study Sutrayana. You would have to study morality training as your first step. And you'd have to develop through Mantrayana and through understanding mandalas. That would be the second step. In ours, it's to understand the hierarchy. It's to understand this cosmology. And without the cosmology, you're not going to be able to understand these higher concepts because you have no frame of reference and you don't have the language of the spirit. So Rudolf Steiner says in the Gospel of John, when, in the case of an initiate, the ego of the astral body is permeated by his individual ego, the consequence is that he becomes conscious of the astral world. He can then perceive the beings around him there and become active in that world. That's the first stage of initiation. He then meets beings who are incarnated in astral bodies. He also meets the group souls of the animals and the higher beings who in Christianity are called angels. On being initiated still more deeply, the ego of the etheric body is also permeated by the individual ego of the human being. The consciousness of the human being then extends into the lower spiritual world. There he encounters the egos of the plants and the spirit of the planet that is connected to the plants. A still deeper initiation takes place when the individual ego permeates the ego of the physical body. Man then rises to personal consciousness in the higher spiritual world, There he meets the egos of the minerals and the still higher spirits above them. Thus, continued initiation raises a man to higher and higher worlds in which he meets with higher and higher beings. Now, that may sound like science fiction, but the reality is, Rudolf Steiner says, when you're looking at a crystal that has gone through a metamorphic process, of an igneous process to become a crystal, you're looking at a hollow space created by a god in the far past. But there is a physical substance upon which endless nourishment comes from a crystal. Matter of fact, the ego in the blood is controlled by silica, a quartz crystal, in the blood. How much silica is in your blood is directly related to the ego. So we relate to the ego, the higher ego of animals, plants, and minerals all the time, but we don't know it. And our higher ego, we relate to that all the time when we have moral imagination, moral inspiration in particular, and moral intuition. And intuition is another word for love. So when we are with our ego, understanding the true nature of your astral body, your etheric body, and your physical body, that then gives you the ability to leave this realm with higher thinking that is developed in one of the, well, I'll say it now. There's a sentient soul, an intellectual soul, and a consciousness soul. And the consciousness soul has a part that when it gets rarefied and it starts looking at the eternal nature of natural law or things that seem to be eternal, or looks at the true nature of love or grace or mercy or anything that's got an eternal element to it, that consciousness soul, that third part of your I am, your ego, rises into what's called the spiritual soul. And it, when you're fortunate and when you're highly developed and when you become initiated, can consciously go into that first realm of spirit self, or manas, or nirmanakaya, or what's called nirvana, all these different names for the same thing. That's your higher self. That is where you actually live. All that we see down here is simply like in a mirror. I think John said, or looking into the mirror of the lake, like the lotus looking into the mirror, seeing itself. And what does it that it sees? It sees the jewel or the stone in the heart of the lotus. And what is that? In a way, it's like silica. It's like this silica in your blood is your I am. But your I am is also found in the skeleton of your body. It's also found a bit in the ductless glands, where it also works through the astral body. So you heard in this quotation of Steiner's him refer to an ego that's part of your physical, an ego that's part of your etheric, an ego that's part of your astral. He said that. So where's your ego? And now we hear that we have three parts of our soul: the sentient soul, intellectual soul, and consciousness soul. Well, is the ego there? He does say in Study of Man, it is in the Study of Man that the ego first alights in the intellectual soul. And that's when we begin to doubt. When we start to doubt things, when we start to use your mind to look at thinking itself, look at perception itself, look at who you are, look at your own ego and how it processes perception, how it processes inner perception, outer perception, how it processes thinking, feeling, willing. When you start to do that, your intellectual soul starts to wake up. And when your consciousness soul, which started in the period which is ruled by archangels, of course, but in 1415 there is a new period that is a larger period when the consciousness soul started to develop. Well, the consciousness soul has a long time to still develop. So we aren't ready to enter into our real spiritual ego in this spiritual world. And if we did, what is it that we would find? And this is what's so amazing, and this kept me out to lunch for a month and a half, was every time I would meet a high spiritual being, I'd ask them, what do you think about, where is Christ right now? Where is Christ right now? Tell me from your clairvoyant perception, and I'm watching you very carefully. Where is Christ right now? And if they couldn't tell me something that looked like where Christ really is right now, Christ is in the etheric, and through the astral manifestation of his pre-earthly deeds, his own ego of the human nature of Christ, which is called the Adam Kadmon, or it's called in the Luke gospel refers to this being, and Steiner refers to this being as the Nathan soul. And this Nathan soul in Christ came down from the Elohim through the archai to the archangels, through the angels, and before Christ incarnated for the mystery of Golgotha, there were 3 pre-earthly deeds, and also an earthly deed where he appeared as Krishna to Arjuna. But these pre-earthly deeds gave us the ability to stand upright, to speak, and to think. These are the interventions that were necessary so that the being of the Son could make sure that the beings who are being incubated on the earth, these little egos, these little I ams, aren't just going to fry alive because the earth becomes so old that it dies. Christ came from the Son to bring the etheric life of the Son back to the earth. And now Christ has redeemed the physical earth, and right now is trying to redeem the etheric earth. But because the ego of human beings is in a battle, and that battle is to turn your ego to darkness, not to light, not to the etheric Christ, not to the light that comes before the etheric Christ, called the Nathan soul, or the Adam Kadmon of the Christ that indwelled in Jesus of Nazareth for 3.5 years or 3 1/3 years. That being is the same as our higher ego. But when we go into the first stage of where our ego is, we don't become just like Christ. We couldn't. We're not evolved enough. We become, through the virgin soul, we become purified enough to be offered as the bride in the realm of the spirit self to Christ in the realm of life spirit. And when that happens, that is a wedding where our ego, which from our lower ego in the physical world becomes our higher ego in the spirit self, weds the true Christ ego in life spirit. That is when the true alchemical transformation happens, the New Jerusalem happens, and basically it's the fulfillment of the apocalypse. And that happens in these realms that the ancient Indians called Nirmanakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Dhammakaya. And if you could manifest anything from those realms, that was proof that you were on the path to become a Buddha through the path of the bodhicitta or the bodhisattva. And well, that's the same thing with all human beings. We're on the path to become not just angels or archangels, but to become time spirits, to become archai. And when that happens, we will not even any longer associate with what I will crudely call the group soul, either the lower group soul of human beings becoming Christened, or the higher group soul of human beings who have been Christened becoming just like Christ, becoming one with Christ. But when we reach to the realm of Atman, Steiner says it's so terrifying that no human being can endure this. You can't even endure going into the realm of imagination, moral inspiration, moral intuition, without unbelievable, terrifying experiences purifying you of all of your lower negative dark side. But when you go to this third realm, he says it's like I was characterizing before. It's not only upside down, it's not only backwards, it's inside out. What you think is who you are becomes more or less empty nothingness, a void, Steiner says. But at the same time, through the entire field of your manifestation of what he calls a zodiac, you become then the ruler of a zodiac. And in that realm of the zodiac, you literally understand what it means to be the gift of Christ, because now you have to turn around and create your own zodiac where there are angels and archangels and archai beings all working together. And all 9 of the hierarchy are working together. And you no longer have freedom because you are, in fact, birthing this process that is like the entire Manvantara, all the Manvantaras of the manifestation of the spiritual development of humanity. That is what you will be involved in once you reach these realms. And it will be pure intuition. It'll be pure love. It'll be in pure coincidence with the Trinity, the higher Trinity, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and, in my opinion, the female Trinity, the Mother, the Daughter, and Holy Sophia. And that your ego will do what the ancient Indian Vedic philosophers with the Upanishads and the Vedas said. Your Atman, your individual I am will become Brahman. And they talk about it like it's just falling off a log. And that's what Dzogchen says. Oh, it's instantaneous. If you realize that you are God, it's instantaneous. There's no time, there's no space, there's nothing holding you back. And so that's what they're describing here is when you become Atman, when you become the Dharmakaya, when you become this highest realm of the human being's third ego, it's not even an ego anymore. It's in direct coincidence with the manifestation of the threefold nature of the hierarchy, the first, second, third hierarchy, the Trinity, so on and so forth. And the Trinity that we find in our spirit, the Trinity in our soul, and the Trinity in our body, which is the ninefold nature of the human being. So when this Trinity works together beautifully with the ethers and their contraction and expansion, when it works with time, when it works with pralayas and manvantaras, it is just like a growing plant. It is like a butterfly that is going through its stages. And we are, when we realize it, all of the animals, all of the plants, all of the minerals, everything in our solar system, because we really can't perceive or understand much beyond it, but everything in our solar system is us. And that's what the human ego is. So, to Dr. Yuri, I'm so sorry I did not attempt to address this before, but I think now you understand why. To address this, even with this tiniest speck of being comprehensive, it is enough to overwhelm anyone because it shakes up your foundational beliefs, and it tells you that you, in most cases, myself and everyone else included, we haven't really thought this through. We don't really have a cosmology that can answer the simplest basic questions. Who are you? Where did you come from? Where are you now? And where are you going? And that's what we need is the biography of the human ego if we are to understand what the I am is.
Yes, I mean, again, it's such it's the central topic of spiritual science, really. I mean, ultimately, coming to self-reference is the task. To be able to have an understanding of what that means, and that's why in lecture 12 of the lecture cycle on the Gospel of St. John, Rudolf Steiner, when he talks about the first stage, the stage of imagination, he gets into talking about his book, The Philosophy of Freedom. And he goes into explaining, because basically what he does in the book, The Philosophy of Freedom, or The Philosophy of Spiritual Activity, he, by a clarification of what thinking actually is, and he does it in stages, and he's very to the point in this lecture. He says, you can't just take one part that's in the back and then move it up to the front, and move, like in most subjects you can do that. You can deal with it kind of more randomly, and this has to be in sequence. And if you follow the sequence of thoughts that he presents in The Philosophy of Freedom, which was his personal path, by the way, that was the path, the method that he used. And it was something that grew out of his studies in Goethean metamorphosis and the writings of Fichte, and also Novalis. And so if you get to an understanding of this whole idea of developing a sense-free thinking, then you can begin to approach this realm of wisdom, is what it is, the realm of Manas, which is the realm of the Virgin Sophia, that is most dealt with in the Gospel of St. John. And for people that are of more of a monastic bent, then they would go through the 7 stages that are outlined in that lecture cycle by Rudolf Steiner regarding the Christian path. But that's a very difficult path for the modern individual. And so there is an alternative way of approaching it, which is the Rosicrucian path. And that way you can still be in the world, and because the path is outlined in the Christian path. The traditional path it involves certain approaches that one would have to retreat from the world for a time at least to be able to enter into it deeply enough. And that's what people did, and you see the stories of the great saints, St. Francis and so forth, that they went through this metamorphosis because it's about catharsis. If you cannot go through the clarification of the astral body through this catharsis or purification, then you won't be able to unfold its inherent capacities that are already indwelling. See? And so anyways, a lot of distractions over here on the sidebar. So pardon me. But in getting into this, I think that we have to be able to stay clear about our concepts. And so the philosophy of freedom is the most effective tool to get to that clarity. And when we used to go to the Institute, every year we would take courses in occult science and outline, the philosophy of freedom, and theosophy, and knowledge of higher worlds, year after year after year, with Werner Glass, Hans Gebert, and various other teachers, that would pick up a course on particular years. And there was always a continual study course in the study of man going on, which was something that people grappled with, especially if they wanted to understand Waldorf education. But I think that anybody that approaches spiritual science, even a little bit, and they have that proper mood of soul, that's the key, that's the missing element usually. That's the secret sauce, that you have to have reverence. If you don't have reverence, the spiritual world won't look at you. And ultimately what happens in supersensible development is you gain a sufficient level of development that you get the attention of the beings of the higher worlds, and they start paying attention to you. And in order to gain this development, and everybody's saying, well, in meditation, go deep within and all that. Well, no, really, if you look at the eye, for example, was created by light. Like, that's what Goethe said. The eye was created by light to receive light. So that you have to have something that mirror imaging is so important, that otherness, the sense of others, whatever, two or more gathered in my name, then I am in the midst of them. That whole process of development is based on having that other than you. If you just look deep within, you're just going to be observing your own content that you already have. You're not going to have that new development that comes out of it. And Steiner is very much to the point of that in Lecture 12 of the Gospel of St. John. And so what is it that comes about? Well, when the individual begins to bring this development to his astral body, it starts to achieve a clarity. In the beginning, it can be quite muddy in its coloration, and that's like that. The etheric astral is like that aura that people talk about. That's one aspect of it. But when you start to clarify through piercing the chakras, then when these chakras can make their imprint on the etheric body, and then that is something that can develop towards the life spirit, and that this development, and ultimately being able to activate the new convolutions of the brain that were brought into being by the Archangel Gabriel in the last angelic period before November of 1879, Rudolf Steiner said everybody has those now. And it could even be discovered in autopsies. But if you don't use it, if you don't start to develop spiritual thinking, that it will atrophy. And so you'll have two groups of mankind. You'll have those that have worked towards this development, utilizing those configurations that are directly tied into the consciousness soul, evolving into being the spiritual soul. And then there's those that don't, and they will revert into animality, basically, and they will over time begin to appear like the animals that they are. And you even see intimations of that with some individuals that you see on the news today, so that there's already that tendency is there. So this is a very real thing that we're talking about. Some levels that are so challenging, that people that just want to have everything be all kumbaya and fun. Well, I'm sorry, you'll have to wait a little while before you get to it, because when you get to someone like, say, Christian Rosenkreuz, he went through 7 incarnations as a martyr, and one has to have the degree of commitment to where things like that can be taken in stride.
Yes, in the study of man, I would always make sure that we walked everybody through their own biography of their own I am. And the first thing I'd say to them is the simplest of things: where is your ego? Where's your consciousness? Where's your I am? And then you point out that it could be in your fingernail, if that's what you're looking at, or in your toe, or in your arm, or in your head. It could be wherever you have pain. Notice how your I am goes to where you have pain. Oh, and boy, you really know you have that part of your body when it's in pain. So what is the I am? The I am's not a nice thing to your life body and your physical body. While you're awake, it actually wears it out. It wears it down like a burning fire. And at night, when your physical and etheric body can relax and regenerate, then your ego and your astral body are somewhat disconnected, not completely, but then they're free to roam and basically digest what happened to you in your day. So the ego isn't a bed of roses. It's not a peach pie. It is effort. It is pain. It is looking at yourself for what it is. It's the 3 evil guardians of the threshold that bring your doubt, your hatred, and your fear to you and stick it in your face and say, you haven't overcome this, so don't try to have sense-free thought. Now, if we talk about that ego, we need to talk about a biography of it. And in the study of man and in theosophy, we would, of course, also in teacher training do biographical studies. So then everyone would learn that from birth to age 7, that is, you're working on your physical body. From age 7 to 14, you're working on your etheric body. And that's why the elementary school child from 7 to 14, it's really these images, these imaginations, living moral imaginations that are being shared with them by teachers by the heart. They had to memorize it and teach it out of their own self. And that's what's actually teaching the children, not the content. And so the child from 7 to 14 is, you're working on their etheric body, their memory body, their body of life and health. Incredible mysteries there. We won't go into that. But then from 14 through 21, they're working on their astral body. And of course, that's the body of desires. And we all know what happens during that time, of course. But just like after you die, you go through realms. You first go through the first realm, second realm, third realm. But when you get to the sun, you go through it 3 times, because the sun is the principal key factor to our whole solar system, to our heart, to our everything. And it's also where the solar logos works. Of course, the Christ has his seat there, and it's also the mother lodge of humanity is there. So when we go through the sun, it's 3 times. So when you get to age 21, your ego isn't just born. I mean, it is just born, but it isn't just born whole. It takes 7 years for the sentient soul from 21 through 28, 7 more years from 28 to 35 to go through the intellectual soul, and from 35 to 42 to go through the consciousness soul. Now we're in the consciousness soul. So let's just say that truly you don't really have an ego much until you are about 35 or beyond, when then you can say, oh, I've worked through my desire body. I've worked through my bad habits. Now I'd like to work through doing something that is, very permanent, and trying to find the eternal in things, trying to find that which is impermanent. And that's the secret, you see, because everything else is an illusion. But what is the ego really looking for? That which is eternal. And what is eternal? Love. The number one thing that's eternal, love. And the ego can't exist without love. So if you're looking at the child when they're young, at about age 3, They usually have a traumatic experience where they understand that their I am is different than their mother and their environment, their siblings, uh, things in the world. And that can be quite traumatic for people. So we have them go back and do a life study. What was the first moment that you had a clear memory? That's when your I am started to come in. So your I am started to come in at age 3, 3.5, or 3 1/3, again at 7, again at 9 to 10, again at 12, again at strongly at 18, strongly at 21. And then for those 14 years there, actually it's 21 years, your ego has to develop itself before it can actually be fully responsible for the fact that it is an ego. And there's also other very subtle rhythms going on. But that's what you need to understand to get the fact that as a Waldorf teacher, you're teaching the etheric body of the child. And where is their ego? You're saying, are you looking towards their higher potential, their higher self? Yes, you are. And so you actually teach to their higher bodies, though in fact they have yet to fully incorporate in them. So this is necessary to understand that your ego, of course, comes out of the prenatal world. And it has everything to do, that prenatal world, with how you think. So if you're going to be a teacher and you're going to understand their thinking patterns, their breathing patterns, their habit patterns of a student, then you need to understand what it is they're bringing from the prenatal world. And also, what is it that they're carrying to the world after death? What is their ego here to do? And in most cases, everyone has a set of things that they've come here to do, that they're working on. And that's the job of the Waldorf teachers, to get out of the way for people to do that. Now, my job as a teacher of adults talking about spiritual matters is to try to show as many examples of a spiritual language and a path to the spirit of enlightenment that one can find, so that you find your own flavor, so that you find your own words. You can make up your own words. It doesn't matter. But your cosmology needs to answer the question of, what is your ego? Where did it come from? Who created it? And the answer to that, anthroposophically, is, of course, it was a donation of the Trinity, and that Christ is the representative of the ego of every human being on the earth, and is here to, with the help of Sophia and the archangels and all the other hierarchical beings, midwife our ego into becoming a world ego. And of course, it's not just selfishness that can be the hindrance. You can be as selfless as possible, but if you don't know how to surrender to the spirit, and if you don't have faith that the spirit will catch you, even when you supposedly extinguish your ego in that third step that I was talking about of initiation, going into intuition, if you can't allow your ego to be 100% extinguished with the faith that it cannot be extinguished because it is immortal, then you don't know your ego. Your ego is immortal, and it has a side of you that is already perfect. And all we really have to do is what basically most of the religions tell us: through grace, accept what you could basically turn into Paul's phrase, not I, but the Christ in me. If you could accept that one phrase, if you could live that one phrase, if that phrase could be what your consciousness hinges upon, then in fact, like deity worship in Tibetan Buddhism or in Vedic Hindu worship, you become the deity that you worship. So if you can worship Christ and understand that Christ is a cosmic ego, higher than even the 9 hierarchy, in the realm with the Trinity, and even that into realms beyond that we can't understand, and that we are a copy of that. If you can understand that, you can worship that, you can have reverence, devotion, and awe for that, you can become that. And that, Dr. Uri, is what I have to say about that. The ego is anything, it is everything, as long as you can get yourself out of the way.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think that there's a few concepts that could help us bring it in a way in which we know, okay, well, now what? What am I supposed to do? And back in 1912, on April 12th, Rudolf Steiner he gave a very succinct image of some of the things that we're talking about here. So I'll just share with you this short little piece. When a man concentrates on a point between the eyes at the root of the nose with the thought, I am, he develops the organ that we call the two-petaled lotus flower, and that makes him into an eye. An animal can't say I to himself. When man's forebrain developed, the organ of the eye was put into man's head at the root of the nose. The eye lives there in man. But in animals, the eye is outside, in front of the head, and not in the skull. In animals, it lives in the astral world. For instance, all dogs have the ego in the astral world. In dogs, a red stream from the astral plane streams in at the place where we have the organ of the eye. And in a dog, this ego becomes manifested in lower desires. In man, the eye streams out of this place. But it isn't enough that the organ of the ego is developed in man, so that the higher self could stream into him to make him into a higher being. We find the organ for this where a vertical line from the top of the head crosses a horizontal line through the root of the nose, or a little above it. This organ is the pineal gland. Man makes a connection with the divine self in the world through the pineal gland. A third higher organ, the 16-petaled lotus flower, lies in man's larynx. And a fourth organ, the 12-petaled lotus, is in the heart region. A man must choose his foods wisely so that these organs can develop in the right way. And so there you have, like nobody else, Rudolf Steiner taking a great deal of the content that we've shared today and brought it down to where you can actually work with it. And it ties into some of the concepts we've shared in previous episodes, to where you have manas, buddhi, atman, the spirit self, life spirit, spirit man or spirit human, or you have the Holy Spirit, the Son or Logos, or the Father Principle, so that these things are all intimately, they're the basis of being. But it's multiple states of being, as was typified by Rene Guénon, that you have this simultaneous indwelling of these principles. And the more we can bring the light of consciousness to this, and it has to do with being able to understand the reflective nature. Like, for example, in Plato's Cave, where he talks about that life is as if we're observing the shadow on the wall of the cave made by the fire. And so it's being able to get to the point to where we can understand things and begin to create. It's like creating a space in preparation for a guest, and so it's called like the bride, like the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz. What does that mean? Well, it's preparing. It's this preparation for a guest, so that you're creating a sacred space that can become worthy of the content of what the higher beings can bring to you. And you already have everything you need to be able to form that rainbow bridge, that Adakarana, as it's called in the East. Or you see in the fairy tale, the beautiful lily and the green snake with Goethe, where it turns into a bridge. The snake turns into this bridge, right? It's transformed. That the actual substance of your fallen nature, it will be transformed into the substance of your redemption. And that's what's so hard for people to grasp, is that this, like in the Kabbalah, they say that you have what's called the world of shells. That's the klipoth, right? And that the light is hidden in that. And so it's again going back to this image of the lotus above the swamp. If the lotus can go into its state of quiescence. Then the water becomes reflective, and it can see its reflection in the water, and eventually it can get to the point to where it can make its imprint on the etheric, the astral imprints. The etheric and the supersensible organs of perception are unfolded through the activity of higher beings to the extent that you've prepared yourself to be able to receive them. And so it's a beautiful image. I mean, just to think about that simple image, it's very much food for this, because you have to have supersensible content within your thinking. And that's why mathematics is actually a very good thing, because it's essentially supersensible. And so, like, for example, at the school of Plato, it said, no man may enter here that doesn't know geometry, basically. And so you have this whole idea that God geometrizes, that's that mystery of number, which is the second mystery of Old Sun, that recapitulates in the sixth mystery, the mystery of the Logos.
It truly is a communion, as you said. It's like sitting down. The old Hebrew tradition was you go up into heaven so you can sit with the elders and basically sup with them, commune with them. And that's what we're trying to do here. Is we're trying to have a reciprocal interaction of communion with higher beings, with your ego. And we've talked before about when you open yourself up to surrender as a vessel, and these beings come into you, it may not feel very comfortable. It may seem as if they are eating you, but that's what you want to have happen. You want to offer yourself up, and that's the reason so many of the tantric rituals have to do with cutting yourself up, cooking yourself up, and offering yourself as an offering to all other beings. And that's after you take in all the evil that they have. So when we're talking about this ego, we're talking about the individual is a homeopathic remedy for as the hieroglyph of the universe. We are, in fact, the 3D hologram of the cosmos, and it's only a matter of time for us to evolve into something that will be extremely similar to that. We could go into that, but those things are far in the future. But I want to emphasize again, when you're talking about your higher self, you're talking about something that is not even in your body. And to get there, you're going to have to do the work of preparation, of oblation, of someone who actually prepares themselves for even being able to think certain thoughts that then can become the food or the red flag that draws the spiritual world to you, so that you can become their food, so that they can then turn and reciprocally give you food. So when we're talking about the ego, I must admit it is an absolute, it's a great honor to try to address this topic. I can't believe that I never thought of it before. Here we are discussing cosmic intelligence, and I never thought, well, we haven't given a biography of the human ego. But when you do, there is so much confusion, and I should have started this off. Egotism is different from egoism. And there's all kinds of things that are ego that are bad, and then there are things that are ego that are good. But one thing's for sure, the I am and the I am that is the I am cannot be bad. And when we are truly in our higher self, then that is really not actually us. It may be tainted by us in the first self and the spiritual self, but by the time it enters into the realm of the life spirit, that is no longer our personal self, and our personal conditioning and all of our personal history makes very little difference when we're working in direct unison, like the higher hierarchy does when they, according to the analogy, sing together in harmonious tunes. And that's what we're trying to do with our ego. But I'll also preface this, because young people come all the time for advice and counseling. Until you're 28, you're supposed to be egotistic. You're not supposed to become selfless when you're 21 years old. That's completely ridiculous. You just got your ego. You're just now you were handed it when you're 21, and until you're 42, you're probably going to make every mistake you're going to make in your whole life, and then you can, after that, have some wisdom based upon the fact that your ego, you had to, for a while, you had to be the slave of your ego. You had to become the master of it. As you pointed out, to those early ages, the age of gold, silver, bronze, and iron. You have to be the king or queen of all of those ages. And when you are, then you are the ruler of your physical, etheric, astral, and ego. And at that point, you then have the possibility of going into your higher three egos. So uh, this question could go on and on and on. There'll be a new article I have coming out talking about the cosmic ego, the cosmic I am, and its history, its biography, because it's so little understood. That hopefully further elucidation of these points will come in our next conversation, I hope.
Nice. It tells me my mic is muted if I start speaking. So that's a nice feature I only noticed the last few weeks. Yeah, it's, and what's nice about this, Douglas and I, you people get to listen in on a conversation that's gone for 40, 50 years, and I have all these notes for what I thought I might talk about today with Douglas, and the part of the beauty of it is that I hardly got to any of them, and so that's perhaps a good thing, because we want to give you things in a way that are digestible. And so the Rosicrucian image is that the pelican is feeding its baby pelicans from its own breast, and there's always this offering, like Douglas says, that we become worthwhile food of the gods, right? I mean, Jesus at the Last Supper, what did he do? He said, "Do this in memory of me." And then he had the bread and the wine, and it was a meal. So that there's that whole image of sacrifice that is at the core of what this is. That if you're not prepared for that, well, maybe this isn't for you. It's kind of like that. But in any regards, I want to thank. We've had some people along the way that have helped me be able to pull this off here with Douglas and my other projects, but it's been made possible by generous support of Tyla, of course, the Empress Tyla. What can one say about her? One of the most dynamic people I know. And Vadim and Christian and Mark and Maud and Vivian and Druvman and Laura and Paula and Rick and so many people have helped with questions and with generous contributions and purchasing my books, and so that this thing just keeps rolling along. Sometimes the wheels are almost falling off, but we get there. But for those of you that might be interested in getting deeper into the conversations that Douglas and I have and other conversations, this is my first book, The Arcana, my faded copy of The Arcana of the Grail Angel, The Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the True Rosicrucian Order. And it has a foreword by Douglas here and a great many diagrams. And all of those diagrams are reproduced in my second book, which is Arcana of Light on the Path. But there's a great many more diagrams added in this, which is my second book. And if you really want to grapple with some of these subjects that we tend to approach here, this is one place where you can look. And this is more of a meditative tool. And the first book, which is some 640 pages, is more of a study of the whole process of historical metamorphosis and the as the mysteries express themselves. My books are available on eBay here in the U.S. If you're outside the U.S., I can work out arrangements through my academia page, which is listed below, or you can private message me on Facebook, and we can make arrangements. I've sent them to countries all around the world. And for Douglas's books, there's links below, and there's free PDFs and different formats of Tyler and Douglas's material that's available for you. You could also purchase hard copies of the books on Amazon. So there's a wealth of information here that I hope can be helpful for those of you out there that are struggling with these mysteries as we are. And all we hope to do here is improve your questions. And so I think that I could find no better person to try and improve my questions with than Dr. Gabriel. Even though he struggles with that title, he did earn it.
Well, I agree. That's the same with you. We have been working on things for so long that as soon as I get a question that I can't handle, I call you. And it's just amazing how our thinking has been so coincident over the last, okay, I'm going to hazard a guess,